I want to read one paragraph from this letter and ask you a final question. From Chessie Prout. If Michael Delaney is confirmed, if an attorney who has brazenly intimidated a minor victim of sexual assault is given the distinct privilege to serve as a judge for the United States Court of Appeals, you are telling victims and survivors that you not only approve of victim intimidation tactics, you reward their enactors with one of the highest legal appointments in the state of Massachusetts. She goes on to say she made this point to the Biden Justice Department. Mr. Delaney, if this committee votes to confirm you, what message does that tell every other victim of sexual assault, child victim of sexual assault, if seeking to out them publicly gets rewarded with a judicial nomination?
Okay, so what you just watched, I need you to sit with that for a second. That is one of the most devastating cross-examinations I have ever seen in a Senate confirmation hearing. If you're new here, this channel is about holding power accountable and calling things exactly as they are. And today, things are very clear. What Senator Ted Cruz did in that hearing room was not political theater. It was not grandstanding. It was a trained lawyer, because Cruz is a Harvard-trained attorney and former Texas Solicitor General, doing what good lawyers do. Reading the document, quoting the document, and asking the man on the stand to explain why his testimony directly contradicts it. And the man could not. Before we get into my full reaction, if you believe that victims of sexual assault deserve protection, not just in the street, not just in the courtroom, but especially from the institutions that were supposed to keep them safe, hit the like button right now. And if this kind of content is something you want more of, subscribe. We're just getting started. Go ahead and watch the full video. I'll be right back.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Delaney, this hearing's not going well for you. And there's a reason for it. Because as much as you may be concerned that it's not going well for you, it's gone far worse for Chessie Prout. The focus of this discussion began when a 15-year-old freshman was sexually assaulted by a senior as part of a campus custom known as Senior Salute, a game where upperclassmen competed to have sex with younger students. In 2015, the culprit was acquitted of felony rape, but found guilty of misdemeanor sexual assault and endangering the welfare of a child. You have repeatedly said you were just an advocate. You were just representing the school, where the school was St. Paul's, one of the most prestigious boarding schools in America. And yet, in your representation of St. Paul's, it was St. Paul's that was the victim. You portrayed the school that a sitting U.S. Senator, indeed a member of this committee, attended. Former Secretary of State John Kerry attended. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller attended. A member of the Kennedy family and 3 Vanderbilts have attended. And in your view, that school was the victim, not the 15-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted. Your response to Senator Hawley was, I was just representing my clients. Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Delaney, you represented your clients very poorly. Because as a lawyer, if your client is a school and they've decided their strategy is to out the girl that was sexually assaulted while in their care and custody, that school is doing a crappy job, and the lawyer who goes in and says, sir, yes, sir, happy to do it, is doing a lousy job representing his client. Now, just a moment ago, you answered questions from Senator Corner. I actually wrote down a couple of things. Earlier in the day, you acknowledged very kindly that the Prout family, I'm quoting you, the Prout family had a strong interest in anonymity. And then just a moment ago, you answered Senator Corner, I wrote it down again, the school did not file a motion to remove anonymity. Mr. Delaney, that testimony is false. I want to read from the motion you filed that is right here. This is on page 2. The school recognizes that JD has an interest in protecting her anonymity. Now notice you told this committee the Prout family had a strong interest. Oddly enough, the word strong was not in your pleading. You graciously conceded they have an interest. Okay. However, in balancing that interest against the prejudice to the school and the public interest in disclosure, the following common sense measures should be taken to mitigate the prejudice to the school, the victim elite private boarding school. The school shall be entitled to identify plaintiffs and JD during discovery. Plaintiffs and JD should not be allowed to proceed under pseudonyms at the trial of the matter. You asked the court, strip her anonymity. And you just told Senator Cornyn, I didn't ask the court to strip her anonymity. Why did you give a false answer to Senator Cornyn?
Senator Cruz, thank you for the question. I did not in any way intend to provide any misleading answers. The section of the brief that you're referencing involves the use of a pseudonym at trial as opposed to at pretrial phases of the case. And I'm not aware of...
And so your view is it's common sense, that's the word you used, that a teenager, the victim of sexual assault, should be stripped of a pseudonym. That's just a common sense step.
No, I'm saying that First Circuit precedent treats the use of fictitious names before a jury at a trial quite differently than it does at pretrial phases.
So Mr. and Mrs. Prout are here today. Thank you for coming. You and your daughter have been victimized now 3 times. First, on that horrific night. Secondly, when Mr. Delaney, representing the school, went into court and tried to strip your daughter's anonymity, tried to out her against her wishes. And third, when the Biden administration chose to reward him by nominating him to the Court of Appeals. I would encourage everyone to read the letter that Chessie Prout has filed. And Mr. Delaney, there is a reason why virtually every Democrat has skipped this hearing. They're embarrassed about this nomination. I want to read one paragraph from this letter and ask you a final question. From Chessie Prout, if Michael Delaney is confirmed, if an attorney who has brazenly intimidated a minor victim of sexual assault is given the distinct privilege to serve as a judge for the United States Court of Appeals, you are telling victims and survivors that you not only approve of victim intimidation tactics, you reward their enactors with one of the highest legal appointments in the state of Massachusetts. She goes on to say she made this point to the Biden Justice Department. Mr. Delaney, if this committee votes to confirm you, what message does that tell every other victim of sexual assault, child victim of sexual assault, if seeking to out them publicly gets rewarded with a judicial nomination?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I have spent nearly 30 years in my legal career, half of that in public service. I have tried through my work as Attorney General and as a frontline prosecutor to represent the interests of victims in all that I did. I would ask this committee to consider the totality of my record over nearly 30 years as it reviews my qualifications.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, you've seen the whole thing. Let's talk. First, something that doesn't get said enough. There are real people at the center of this story. Mr. and Mrs. Prout were sitting in that hearing room. Their daughter Chessie, who was 15 years old when she was assaulted, had to file a letter to that committee just to fight for her own dignity one more time. Remember that before we say anything else. Now, Ted Cruz. I'm not here to tell you he's a perfect man or a perfect politician. What I am saying is that what he did in that room was exactly what a Senate confirmation hearing is supposed to look like. He came prepared. He had the actual court filing in his hand. He didn't ask questions he didn't already know the answers to. That is not luck. That is homework. The moment that got me was when Cruz lays out the accusation that Delaney told Senator Cornyn the school never filed a motion to strip the victim's anonymity, and then reads directly from the motion. Page 2, word for word. And it says plain as day that the victim should not be allowed to proceed under a pseudonym at trial. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a filing that says expose this girl's name in open court. And the man who filed it just told a Senate committee it didn't happen. Delaney's defense was that there's a legal distinction between pretrial anonymity and trial anonymity, and technically that distinction exists. But he led with the most charitable version of his own actions, and Cruz had to drag the full picture out of him line by line. That is not someone owning what they did. That is someone hoping the committee doesn't read the footnotes. Cruz's point about the legal strategy also landed for me. The school's goal was to limit liability and protect its reputation. So the strategy chosen was to make the trial about the victim's identity rather than the perpetrator's conduct. How does that help the school? It doesn't. It makes them look exactly like what Chessie said they were, an institution that protected itself at the expense of a 15-year-old girl in their care. Cruz called it crappy strategy and lousy lawyering. He was right on both counts. Then there's the nomination itself. The Biden administration looked at this record and said, yes, this is who we want on the Court of Appeals. And Cruz pointed out that virtually every Democrat skipped the hearing. When your own side won't show up to defend the nominee, that tells you everything. But Chessie Prout's letter is what I keep coming back to. She didn't write it out of bitterness. She wrote it as a warning that confirming Delaney sends a message to every other victim watching. And she's right. Every person confirmed to the bench signals to ordinary people what the system values and who it protects. Cruz came into that room, did the work, read the brief, caught the contradiction, and refused to let it go. And at the end of it all, he made space for the Prout family, acknowledged them, and read their daughter's words into the congressional record. Not every politician would do that. Some would use the case as a prop and move on. Cruz stayed with it. That is what accountability looks like. That is what these hearings are for. If this video gave you something to think about, share it. These are the conversations we need to be having, not just about this case, but about how our institutions respond when the powerful and the vulnerable are on opposite sides of a courtroom. See you in the next one.